Welcome back to the morning show here on the Rise News. With the results of some governorship elections announced, candidates beginning to reject results. Rivers State elections suspended. Sokoto, Bauchi, Plateau, and Adamawa declared inconclusive. The electoral process has been fraught with so many controversies. Now joining us to speak on this is Electoral Observer and Executive Director, Center for Transparency International, Dr. Chima Amadi. I want to say good morning and welcome to the show this morning.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, we'll start it off and ask, as an election observer, give us your general assessment of the just concluded 9th of March general elections.
Just before I came on the studio, I mentioned to a friend that I think that Dr. Goodluck Ebele Jonathan, his statue should be erected on perhaps every secondary school and every national institutions for people to learn that there's a singular gesture and his mien to the approach in the 2015 was what saved Nigeria's democracy. What we are seeing today is the desperation of politicians at full glare. What we are seeing today is a set of political actors that have simply refused to play by the rules. Take, for instance, what is happening across the states. In 4 states where the elections have been declared inconclusive. Simply, the political actors, realizing that they are losing the game, decided to induce violence that's led to the cancellation of so much votes, which when put on the crucible in terms of analysis, the number of cancelled votes becomes so much higher than the number of the margin of defeat, making it impossible for the umpire to make a return based on the guidelines that were released before the elections. That is a story all over the country. In Imo State, for example, violence, burning down of INEC institutions in Ebonyi. In many parts of the country, political actors have simply refused to play by the rules, have unleashed brigandage on a civil exercise that ordinarily should go smoothly. It has been so much militarized, while the institutions of government that are supposed to nip this in the bud either collude or stand by and watch. In the midst of all this, we are delighted with the performance of the Commissioner of Police in Kano State, who, against all odds, stood for truth, stood for the institution, stood for the protection of rights and the ability of people to freely vote for whoever they want to.
Dr. Amadi, you are an observer. What was the scope of your observation in this last elections? Because the role of the military is what I really want to ask you here. There were reports and allegations that the military personnel prevented observers and sometimes INEC officials from getting to the collation centers in states such as Akwa Ibom, Zamfara, Imo, Rivers. Did you observe that as well?
Yes, the Center for Transparency Advocacy mobilized over 3,000 observers. And these reports actually came places like River State. It was not just about the observers. Various television organizations were showing footages of the mayhem that was that election. We saw it, our observers experienced it to the extent that the election management body in the state had to declare that they have been prevented from carrying out the exercise, and that led to the suspension of that exercise in River State. The same thing in Akwa Ibom State. In fact, before the elections, observers have started, different observer groups have started talking about what people call militarization and deployment of security operatives in a partisan way. And it played out on the day where observers were not allowed to have access to, facilities that ordinarily their job duty descriptions allowed them to access. They couldn't access collation centers; they were prevented. There was attempts to, cherry pick those who could have accesses to this place. In other places, for example, in River State, result sheets were torn by men who were wearing military fatigues. In River State, hiding under the guise of, the security situation in that state, observers, even politicians from other parts of other political parties were also prevented. It was a disaster, really, judging by the performance of the security agencies.
Yes, Dr. Amadi. Looking at the turnout of voters on election day, on Saturday. What will you attribute this to? The militarization or lack of faith in the system?
Well, no one factor can be said to be the overarching reason why voters decide to shun the system. For me, looking at it from a more nuanced perspective, I want to say that the number of voters we have in our registration is bogus and needs to be looked at again. Because if you recall, during the successive registrations that led to the now 84 million that we have, you had a situation where politicians, in a bid to make up their numbers, filled the register with all kinds of ghost persons. But having said that, again, you also need to look at what is the average turnout in accepted worldwide as the average turnout for in democratic. In democratic climes, it has not, the range between 40 to 51%. When you have anything higher than that, it's normally seen as an outlier, except in dictatorships where you have that. However, what you had in Nigeria is becoming an outlier, going by the very, very poor turnout. This could be because, one, they attempt to suppress votes. You cannot suppress votes with the militarization and the heavy presence of security agencies in an exercise that was supposed to be civil, and you expect people to come out. People are generally afraid for their lives. Secondly, you have to look at the issue of lack of enthusiasm after the presidential election. It was obvious that whoever was on the losing side might not have that same enthusiasm to want to go back and cast their votes, especially given the outcome. So there will be those who didn't want to, show up. You also have the issue of, people not even having faith that their votes will count. You have issues, people talking about, oh, this has already been written, what are we going to do? So if you look at it in that holistic, you now understand why there's apathy. But the apathy is so ridiculous that when you look at 18% turnout in a state like Lagos, the turnout was not even up to 21% for a state that has about 6.3 million registered voters. Then you begin to ask yourself the question. But also don't forget that the presidential elections is usually, you normally have more turnout, especially in a developing country where the center controls virtually everything. The center determines what happens at the federating units. And so because of that, there's usually more attention on the center. So I think that going forward, Nigeria should devise a way of having every election the same day. If this election has been conducted the same day, I think that the situations we are having now, talking about apathy and the destructions, will not happen. Don't forget that there's also what you call momentum. For people who have lost the election, the momentum is not on their side. And for those who have won election, the momentum is on their side. But we're seeing interesting races, though. If you look at Adamawa, look at Kano, look at Sokoto, look at Plateau, you are seeing interesting races. Perhaps this will be because of the improvement of the system to the extent where elections are now becoming more competitive, and so the era of just sitting down and manipulating figures or writing figures for yourself, is becoming very impossible.
All right, Dr. Amadi, trying to focus on, or trying to pick up the pieces of what seemed to be a fractured electoral process leading up until now. Can you help us appraise these elections, parallaxing it with the 5 other elections we've had in this particular Fourth Republic? How good or how bad has this electoral process been?
In looking at an appraisal, using a time series analysis of the analysis of the performance of the AMB, I really, as a scholar, would not want to take the 1999, 2003, and 2007 elections into focus, because those were not elections. It has been agreed that what happened in 1999, 2003, and 2007 were just the elite sitting down to allocate votes to themselves and allocate to themselves how they want to disperse with power and how they want to distribute power. But coming in 2010, when the former President Goodluck Jonathan decided that there was need to bring in some level of credibility to the EMB and brought brought in the person of Atahiri Jega, and then with the introduction of technology like the smart card reader technology, the PVC, with an attempt to clean up the voters register. In any election, the first step to having a credible election is the voters register. So analysis perhaps start from 2011. 2011 was some sort of test for Jega, and the lessons he picked up in 2011, he took to 2015. And so we saw a marked improvement. The introduction of the card reader technology allowed for the first ever transition from an incumbent to an opposition party. There were lapses. Those lapses were all too obvious. You saw the high use of incident forms, and which led to so much turnout, the cancellation of about 160 elections, unprecedented in the history of election in this dispensation. Now, coming to 2019, we saw an improvement in the discard of the card reader. Now, that discard of card reader is perhaps what is leading to what people are now talking about. I mean, the discard of incident forms, That discard of incident forms has led to what people might call apathy. If you recall, before now, there were people throwing numbers. In Kano, the sitting governor said he was going to deliver 5 million votes to his party. Somewhere in Lagos, somebody said he was going to deliver 3 million votes. Elsewhere, somebody said 2 million votes. Where are those votes? It was simply not possible because there was no incident forms for you to use to manipulate figures or to bring all kinds of people to vote. And the insistence on the use of card reader as an accreditation tool also helped to whittle that number. So the number you are seeing from a state that has about 6.3 or Kano that has about 5.5, just turning out, less than 2 million, 2.5 million, tells you that the decision to discard with incident forms worked. But on the side of security, what we saw this year was a disaster in terms of performance of the security operatives. If the security operatives had performed this way in 2015, the current leadership would not have been anywhere close to power. And that's a serious indictment on the security apparatus in this country. And there needs to be a national conversation. You cannot ask an umpire to do a duty and not give that umpire the tools to do it. When the umpire says is in charge of elections and the umpire does not have control of security, the umpire does not have the control of others in the value chain that can help it to do its job. And also the behavior of political actors that have decided that rather than elections, they want to have a do-or-die affair, to the extent that you are hearing of the burning down of facilities of the umpire in different states and having the killing of individuals in different states. This, you can say, casts a very bad slur on the election. And so if you look at it in terms of the operations, yes, logistically, the first election in February 23 was a nightmare, was a disaster. But there was an attempt to pick up this, and so by 8 o'clock, many polling units had been deployed. But in terms of the performance of others in the value chain, and in terms of the ability to allow people vote seamlessly, I can say that this election has not lived up to expectation.
Well, Dr. Amadi, they say every election has its own narrative. 29 states have their governorship elections on Saturday. So far, we have seen 10 results come in, and we have had four declared inconclusive. That's 14 out of the bulk. But tell us, as an observer, what were the lapses you discovered in the processes from the polling units to the collation and declaration of results?
You see, in the election management system, there's what to call a weak link. The weak link has always been collations. There's not this time. If you move away from February 23, where the obvious lack of coordination in terms of logistics were too obvious, such that by 1 p.m., 2 p.m., many polling units still had not even been mobilized to vote. But when you move away from that, there was marked improvements. By the observer analysis, many observer groups rate the deployment to polling units between 85 to 90% as at 8 a.m., apart from the incidents that was seen in places like some places in Lagos State. Now, when you now get down to the voting, there are also people voted, people cast their ballots, except in areas where, for example, in Imo, where there were violence as voting was going on, attempt to snatch ballot boxes, which is, the number really insignificant. These ones, I think the INEC had conquered these ones. But now when you now move forward, after the casting of ballot, and now you sort the ballots, and then you count, and then when you move away from there to collation, to the ward collation units, to the local government, that is where the problem starts. First, you have individuals, security agencies that are meant to provide security for the in the facility where collation is meant to happen, absconding, colluding to prevent either observers, to prevent agents from having access to this place, because this is where whatever malpractice wants to happen, this is where it goes on. Next, you have a situation whereby compromised ad hoc staff of the EMB begin to manipulate processes. So rather than allow what happens at the field to be reflected in the collation in the ward, this is where manipulation takes place. Now, where ad hoc staff even decide to be strict, to show integrity, this is also the place where political actors use all kinds of means to get a result. Remember, it was in this also place, the collation center, that a serving governor was alleged to have, contrived a result under duress, leading to the returning officer claiming that he made a declaration while, under duress. Now, you recall that the INEC had taken a position by withholding, the certificate of return for that particular area. So, at the collation center, you have a problem. And so, the move to resolve the collation center crisis, which is the weak link in the election value chain, for election operation value chain, it was why the INEC, the civil society organizations, the legislature introduced an amendment to the Electoral Act Bill, which unfortunately was not assented to. And to the extent that it was not assented to, the idea was to have an electronic transmission of results so that it makes it impossible for anybody who wants to manipulate any result. But that was not done. It was not achieved. And so you have to resort to manual collation and transmission. This is why we are here today, and this is why you have all these pockets of controversies. Also, don't forget that they resort to violence to deliberately induce cancellation of votes. So you see that your opponent is having an upper hand, you induce the cancellation of votes in certain areas or certain patterns so as to get what you call an inconclusive election, and perhaps mobilize to have a rerun, maybe using other factors that could play in your favor. These are some of the weak links we are seeing in terms of operational.
Okay, Dr. Amadi, let us look at two propositions going forward. Your hint of holding all elections on one day, to me, may cause another logistic nightmare. But there are others who are also asking that perhaps if we do the sequencing the other way, starting from the lower elections, House of Assembly, governorship, National Assembly to presidency, that perhaps we'll have a better outcome, because what we are doing now is like playing the finals of a football match first. Then the second proposal, are we not close to electronic voting? Because if card reader works in every nook and cranny of this country, where you thumbprint and they can access the database, a device somewhere for you to now vote electronically, are we not close to electronic voting?
Thank you. You see, the issue of sequencing for me is just belaboring the issue. There is no sequencing that Nigeria has not tried since 1999. We have tried all sorts. We have tried governorship first, and then National Assembly, then presidency, 3 elections. We've tried the presidential election and National Assembly election, then the governorship. We have tried all sorts of sequence. Trust me, it has absolutely nothing to do with sequence. There's no sequence that we have not tried. So the issue of, okay, maybe if you play it around this way, it could work this way, does not arise. Everything that has been tried in terms of sequencing has always led to the same thing, desperation by political actors. It is not going to work. It's simply not about sequencing. Back to your question about electronics. We are closer to electronic voting than ever before, but even with its own problems. If you look at our electoral system, you will find that out of the various steps that you need to get to the final balloting, casting of votes electronically, many of our processes are now electronic. The first process, which is the voter register is now electronic. It's stored electronically. So we've conquered that. From when a voter register used to be stored, manually, you have a long, a big paper, and then you look for it. It's now stored electronically. The next step is accreditation. Before, accreditation used to be done manually. Now it is done electronically. You have the smart card reader, you have your PVC, which authenticates, the identity of that person, and then you have the fingerprint identification system, which is carried out by the smart card reader. So that is also an electronic system. The next step was supposed to be, electronic transmission of results, which was provided for in the Electoral Act Amendment Bill. There was a provision for electronic transmission. So while voting is completed, you transmit election and bypass all this movement from one place to the other, making it very difficult for anybody who wants to rig or manipulate collation to do that. But because there was no legal framework backing it up, because the president refused to assent to that beautiful innovation, it couldn't have been done. What INEC is doing presently now is just they're doing a pilot scheme of that arrangement. They already had the tablets, but whatever they see in the upload and transmission cannot be used or presented in collation because it is a pilot. There's no legal framework for it. Now, when you achieve transmission, the next step you need to look at is also balloting. There's challenges with this. Don't forget that as we speak, the Americans are still reeling over the issues of manipulation of their results, alleged manipulations or collusion of the elections. In Kenya, the other time, the results of the Kenya presidential election was cancelled because, certain, fifth columnists hijacked the process, the process of transmission electronically. In Ghana, at a point, Ghana started electronic transmission and all that. 15% later, after transmission, they had to stop and resorted back to manual because their systems had been compromised. That being said, I simply think again that we have to come to a situation where voting is done electronically, the ballots are cast electronically, transmission done electronically, as soon as the systems can be guaranteed to work. Because if these present political actors who use all kinds of tactics to beat the system can do this even as we are, do you think that using, some of these young geniuses to penetrate the system and rig elections, do you think that will be far away from them? So while we are enthusiastic that we might come to 100% electronic voting, we also need to be aware of some of the bottlenecks. Also, we also look at the issue of technology infrastructure across the Nigerian states. There are places today that you still don't even have, not even what you call it, the 2 gig or what. People are going to 4 gig or what. You don't even have any kind of technology infrastructure. Yes. You don't even have it. So these are conversations we need to have.
All right, Dr. Amadi, a follow-up to the last question. Since we are focusing on the process, but let's not focus on the political umpire in this particular instance. 234.5 billion spent by INEC in this particular election. And looking at it, what could have been done better? Or which places do you feel that INEC should have actually raised their game, or where did they drop the ball?
Okay, so for clarity, INEC did not spend 234. INEC's portion of that 234 billion is 189 or so. The others in the components spend that. You talk about the security agencies, the police, the DSS, and all that. So I think that INEC perhaps was overwhelmed with its logistical operations. We had a postponement of the elections because of that will I say, lack of appreciation of what it was going to face. You had a movement of an addition to the voters register of about 14.9 million persons, bringing it to about 84 million. You had a system that accommodated 70 political parties on a ballot paper that was as long as God knows what. You had a situation where back and forth between the president and the presidency and the National Assembly led to various amendments that left the umpire with a very small window to play with. You had a situation where political parties could not put their acts together. And in all this conversation, nobody is talking about the fact that many political parties, up to last week, were still getting court orders asking, mandating INEC to remove this person or that person should not be on ballot. Now, INEC perhaps could have been better prepared to anticipate these situations, and if they had done that, we would not have had the postponement. Because it could not anticipate this and put its logistical operations in proper shape, you had a situation where the February 23 elections was, at best, not impressive in terms of deployments of logistics. I also think that INEC can do better by training its ad hoc staff more. In our observation report, we see ad hoc staff, especially members of the youth corps and other ad hoc staff, who did not understand what they were out to do. Sometimes they had to ask our observers, please, in this case, what do I do? And observers had to explain to them. I think INEC had to start the 3 days, 4 days window, or whatever window that they have in training their ad hoc staff. They need to be looked into. Perhaps a system where every final year student that is going to go for mobilization for NYSC mobilization, you introduce a course or so, maybe their general studies course, the GES courses in the universities, where they are told some of these things are taught to them. And by the time they get to camp, they already are aware of the processes of involvement as ad hoc staff in INEC elections. You need to do that. You need to train them. Another component is INEC, although INEC has already started disciplining its staff that have compromised, and last time we had about 225 of INEC staff that were, summarily dismissed after facing different court actions. But INEC needs to do a lot of in-house cleansing, because we have also seen situations where some INEC staff have colluded with politicians to compromise the system. But also in this regard, we must give kudos to the INEC, because even in the middle of elections, we saw the INEC arresting an electoral officer in Imo State. In Imo State, the collation officers were changed about 2 times. First of all, they were supposed to come from a particular institution. What goes to the INEC that those ones have been compromised, they had to change to another institution. 2 hours to the opening of polls. Information got that political actors have also hijacked it. They had to change again to another set of collation officers. And the synergy between INEC, I think INEC needs to have another conversation with security operatives to let them understand that you are not beholden to any political party. You are beholden to the Nigerian people. You are beholden to this process. No matter the state of preparedness of INEC, if security operatives do not step up their game, I assure you, there won't be, decent elections in Nigeria.
Well, talking about security, Dr. Amadi, the Nigerian army had debunked allegations that its personnel were involved in electoral malpractices. And there's a statement from the Nigerian army. Colonel Shehu Musa, who's the spokesperson, I'm just going to read some of the things from the statement, what he said. He said, credible intelligence available to the Nigerian army has confirmed the kitting of political thugs with military uniforms and arming them of same to impersonate soldiers and perpetrate various crimes in the furtherance of activities of their political bosses. It said, sadly, the people will not be able to identify the difference between the real and the fake soldiers. You are an observer, you were on ground. With all the paraphernalia that comes with the Nigerian army personnel, did you think that those were fake soldiers in the incidences recorded?
Pardon me to say that what the Nigerian army is saying is bullocks. I say this with every sense of responsibility. So you hear that a group of people are impersonating you wearing military fatigues, the fatigue of the Nigerian army, the Air Force, and all that. They ran amok for hours, close to 10 hours. We saw, our observers saw armored, personnel carriers. We saw all kinds of equipment that is associated with the military. And at no point did the military say, okay, if this is happening in the territorial area of a sovereign nation like Nigeria, that people are impersonating your officers, I'm quoting them now saying being impersonated, you do not have enough time to make attempts to move into that environment
perhaps either apprehend these people because it is now a clear and present danger even to the state, then that tells you that whoever, that is even ridiculous and shameful that the army should put up that statement. That tells you that whoever is the head of the military that supervises this whole thing should not have a job as we speak. That person should leave his job. That the fact that some people should be dressed according to them in that fatigue and take over a state for hours and you put up that kind of statement means that Nigeria is not safe. Perhaps that is the reason why Boko Haram is having a field day and nothing is happening. The truth of the matter is this, that political actors had somehow succeeded in having access to certain military personnel. If the army high command is saying that they are not aware, there's somebody somewhere within the chain, within the command chain, has assisted these people in deploying soldiers, military men to a civil exercise. At this point, we want to say that even the Nigerian police, especially in Rivers State, the Nigerian police could not even do much because the military has completely taken over. So the point is that we cannot continue to have this kind of denials and expect that people are fools. We can fool all the people, once in a while, but not all the time. We are not all fools. And until the Nigerian military realizes that its duty has nothing to do with getting involved in elections, then I think we will not have, we'll continue to have these kinds of situations.
Dr. Amadi, I want to say thank you for joining us today for the brevity of time. I have to stop at this particular junction and say thank you for actually shedding light on the just concluded elections, which we're still getting results from. All right, it's now time for a short break on the morning show. When we return, we will be having another guest, Dr. Libelus, to actually shed more light on the electoral process. Don't go anywhere.
Made him a doctor.